Beyond is sponsored by the Malone Society, whose works help keep alive the plays we work on. The Malone Society regularly publishes volumes of early plays which otherwise might not be available. To join the Society or find out more about their publications, go to malonesociety.com for more information. Hello and welcome to the Beyond podcast, and today's chat is about... Okay, regular listeners to the podcast will have probably heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again. I sometimes edit it out, so I can't remember how many times I've actually said this online. But something I usually say when talking to medievalists or early modernists is I will often trot out this adage of the playhouse drama from the Elizabethan onwards is just ossified medieval drama, confined, controlled by the forces of architecture and commerce, and ultimately rather dull. I don't know whether that's appropriate for the conversation we're about to have or not, but we are going to be talking about a book that's just come out, at least at the time of recording, Predramatic Theatre, the Radicalisation of Early British Performance, and to talk about the nature of the words drama and theatre, and a whole host of other things. We have my wonderful guests. So my wonderful guests, who are you and what is your purpose in life?
Hello, I'm Eleanor Rycroft, and I'm an associate professor in early modern performance in the Department of Theatre at the University of Bristol.
Hello, I am Greg Walker from the University of Edinburgh, and together our purpose in life is to change the way the world thinks about pre-theatrical theatre. And clumsiness of that phrase, I think, ought to set us up to discuss why we are interested in what we do.
Yes, and it's delightful to have you both on. We've had Greg on before to talk about John Heywood many times, who actually only gets a little look in, I think, in the book in comparison with other texts. But yes, we're talking about pre-dramatic theatre. So how are we defining the words theatre and drama, and also what those words mean when in different languages they have different utilizations for words as well? Because this is quite important, because your book is in relation to and dancing around with ideas of post-dramatic theatre. So shall we start with defining what we're talking about here before we go further? I don't know who wants to leap in on the definition of all the words that we use on a day-to-day basis. I think I'll go to Greg first.
We were gesticulating madly there to try and work out which of us was going to pick this one up and throw it to the other one as quickly as possible. The thing we're bouncing off is the notion of post-dramatic theatre, which is they're written by a guy called Hans Thees Lehmann, who posits that the only real radical kinds of performance happened after the 1960s, when we went out of theatres and went into the streets and started cutting ourselves open in galleries and shouting a lot and being kind of unstructured and performative in all kinds of radical ways. And what we're interested in is the thing they all agree on is that there's this thing called drama, which is bourgeois and dull and takes place in theatres and kind of plays off what you were saying at the beginning, Rob. And what we're interested in is what came before that rather than what came after it. And we are evangelizing, we might say, for the radicalism of that, the way it's just as interesting in its own way as the shouting in the streets, and much more interesting in some ways than those things that take place in playhouses. And I'm avoiding the word theatre there because there is a confusion. And Eleanor, at the moment you want to step in and save me from this rabbit hole, do.
It's all very confusing, isn't it? And we'll probably end up using words like drama in our conversation at the same time as we try and desperately avoid using that term in the book in favour of theatre and performance. But I think what Lehmann's railing against is the dramatic, and he sees that as something around illusion, around the construction of illusions, that he's not saying that audiences are wholly taken in by these, but that is the mode of communication, is to create a kind of imaginary fictive world. And we suggest that the pre-dramatic defiantly doesn't do that, or not even defiantly, because it's not going against anything. It's inventing. And I suppose the fact that perhaps theatre history scholars haven't seen it in those terms means that they overlook it and therefore argue for innovation and originality and novelty, where in fact we find repetition and recursion of ideas from a former age. So that's, I suppose, that's part of the book is kind of saying, when you say site specific and you try and define the site specific in post-dramatic terms, you're missing out a very, very sophisticated expression and articulation of that on York city streets and in great halls of palaces. That was the primary theatre of that age.
Yes, and for our listeners who we may have leapt ahead here on, is that prior to the playhouses that were built towards the end of the 16th century, theatre happens where it happens, where it's convenient for it to happen, where it can be situated, and is it fair to say it's a bit more like a liquid in that it will fill the space in which it is placed, rather than something where the plays are designed to fit within a playhouse and the architecture starts imposing itself on the nature of that. I mean, obviously there's lots of caveats to that, but in the sense that it's just inherently playful before playhouses.
Yes. I mean, the thing about theatre is that it does, like it or not, condition the experience of witnessing performance. You go to the play. You go to the play with the view of going to the play. You're not surprised by a play. You go into a theatre and there's a play. Oh, who knew? It's a conscious act of moving from one kind of state of being and one place to another. And the play is tailored for that space, and you are an audience and the actors are actors, and that's the relationship. Whereas before, I mean, the liquid metaphor is a good one, because it fills the space, but you can still see through it if it's a clear liquid. I'm thinking of water rather than hot chocolate here. And so the space you're in doesn't just exist to allow you to watch a play in it. It's got lots of other associations, and the play has to accommodate those. So you're in a hall, so the actors talk about being in a hall, and you're not necessarily there just to be an audience. You may have had a meal, or you may be walking through the streets of York in order to go and buy a cow or a pig or a bag of rats on sticks or whatever, and there's a play, and then suddenly you're confronted with this. And you're watching it in front of a building which has got some other meanings to you than just the place where you watch a play. So it fundamentally alters the way you respond to drama and how drama responds to you, I think.
And there's a more active negotiation in that sense, in between the performer and the audience as well, in terms of the performer doesn't have automatic control of the space as they do in a theatre. That is negotiated with a live audience, and in fact the live audience may negotiate back and radically change where your entrances are.
I mean, there's no fourth wall. I mean, that's the fundamental thing to drama in its bad sense, used by Lehmann and Brecht and all those German theorists who put it in italics and said, this is what we're going against. The fourth wall, the closed space, the control, the delivery of content to an audience who's just there to receive it. None of that works in pre-theatrical theatre, drama, performance.
And I think that where play is really like drama as well, it's this kind of multivalent term as well, because you're moving, we mentioned actors already, but you're moving from players to actors, from the amateur to the professional. And there is a playfulness and knowledge about all these different layers that's going on in the dramaturgy. We talked about the Great Hall, but the Great Hall might be, at times it's going to be ancient Rome, at times it's going to be Cardinal Morton's Hall, and at times it's going to be Scotland. And there's all this playfulness might almost mask the sophistication of that, of what the dramatists are actually doing and negotiating in the moment of performance.
And should we throw in some examples here? Because let's name them. So we've got Fulgence and Lucrece is perhaps one of our ultimate sort of hall plays that plays with the idea of when does the performance start? What is the performance? It's designed for an event, and it starts by two people who are ostensibly servers at the event, who then start talking about the event that they are in, and that there's a play about to start, but the play has already started because they're saying dialogue from the play, and immediately it sort of becomes a bit wibbly wobbly and timey wimey in really interesting ways. And Fulgence and Lucrece is sort of that really big light bulb in our surviving records at the time, because that's the other thing we sort of throw out there, that we have a lot of very patchy witnesses to what is going on in these performances. But yeah, Fulgence, shall we say, as a starting point there to talk about some of these things.
It's really funny you should mention wibbly wobbly timey wimey, because I actually had that in my notes once when I was giving a talk about this chapter. I was like, just talk about wibbly wobbly timey wimey for a bit. Yeah, I mean, what we sort of found in Fulgence is that, yes, they have this beginning that's continually deferred, and then they eventually reach this point, which we point out is 364 lines, where they go, "Oh, the play's begun," and in theatrical terms, 364 lines is what, about 20 minutes, 25 minutes into a performance, and then there's the question of the part one and the part two of that play. And interestingly, when the actors come back from part two, players come back from part two, the other players haven't turned up. So the actors have to kind of have this moment with the audience where they're like, sorry, it's going to begin again in a minute. So there's this kind of constant confusion and blurring of where the performance event begins and ends, which is also exacerbated by the fact that this is an interlude. So it happens in between other forms of play. And again, this isn't a problem. This is the key thing about pre-dramatic theatre. What might present itself as a problem in the theatrical contract of the dramatic theatre is actually an opportunity for pre-dramatic makers.
Because when people build playhouses, they very, very quickly establish when a show starts.
Yeah.
There are literal trumpets saying, doing the equivalent of first bells, the show will start in 5 minutes, announcement in modern theatres. And admittedly, then playwrights play around with when does it start within that context. But when you're trying to cue when does the show start, when there is no architecture, when there is just an event, especially an event which may be going on for several days, which involves other events, which may link or not link with the event that's happening in that moment.
And then the follow-on question becomes why? Like, why mess around with time? And then it becomes more interesting, because then it becomes about really the socio-political aims of performance. And if you mess around with the beginnings and ends of the event, then I guess what we're arguing is that you get some of those effects that immersive theatre theorists talk about, where the event becomes more cognitively and physically embedded in the lives of the spectators, because they don't know when it's begun or end. There's not a kind of, okay, that was a nice entertainment, now I'm going to close the chapter on it and go home. It continues to resonate through their lives, and that's a direct aim of this type of performance. In the case of Fulgence and Lucrece, probably with a political motive, but in the case of Mystery Cycles, because this theatre is directly appealing to people to think about the end of their lives and to be prepared for judgment. So it's important that it doesn't end.
It's quite interesting in terms of cognitive research, that you behave differently and you feel differently depending on what you think you're doing. And in a theatre today, and I guess quite quickly after the playhouses were built, you have a contract which tells you what you are. You're there to watch a performance. You're not responsible for it, but you can judge it. And if you think, you were talking now about the, play begins in 5 minutes and all that kind of thing. Playwrights and companies now spend an awful lot of energy and effort trying to create the danger that comes with uncertainty. And, sometimes it works, but it's really powerful, those moments in theatre when you're not quite sure, have they got the lines wrong? Has a prop not worked? All those kind of moments when the play wobbles and suddenly you're attentive in a different way because you think something might happen unexpectedly. That was the given in the pre-theatrical theatre because, it was that constant negotiation. The audience is always something else as well as just watching. They're waiting for their dinner, or they're thinking about their religious vocation, or they're just cross that this is taking a bit too long. And all that has to be built into the performance. So, it's always constantly renegotiated. And you get that, I think we talk about this in the book, actors have to negotiate the way into the play. And then after it, they have to make it clear that they want to leave now and it's done. And all that has to be part of the actor's trade. When, oh, look, here comes so-and-so. And, oh, evening, everyone. It doesn't pretend that you're somewhere else. It acknowledges that you're in a hall. And particularly with Fulgens, for instance, when these two characters who don't even have names, they're called A and B in the printed text, they may well be people that the audience knew. They may well be part of the household that put the play on. So they're not pretending to be themselves. They are themselves, and they're doing this performance. And that gives it an edge.
Yeah, or one of Greg and I worked on the play of the weather at Hampton Court Palace, and you've the whole point of the suitors they're the type of people you might find in the Henrician court suing to the god Jupiter. But my favorite one is the laundress, who is styled to kind of come as if she's passing through the Great Hall, and she sees the gentlewoman suing for her particular weather, and she takes issue with it, and so she starts a debate. But it's how was that character costumed? How were they presented? Was there a sort of stage invasion idea, or was it clear that they were part of the play? These are the things that we just don't know, but which are fascinating.
And Heywood's doing that all the time, and collaborators. I mean, I think thinking on the other end of a performance, I mean, a lot of plays will end with, supplication to the king, isn't he wonderful, and God and counsellors, etc. But there are some plays where actually the ending is negotiated as well. I mean, Gentleness and Nobility, a great favourite of mine, where it's like it ends and then, oh no, we come on to say a bit more. Oh, we've got another bit. Somebody else comes in to send it in a different direction as well, and that's fascinating in its playfulness. So, what point does the play actually end, and does it ever end? Does the audience keep going?
And we make that argument in terms of Lyndsay's Satire of the Three Estates, and he's satirically testing the audience's patience. This is a 5.5 hour play, and he will not end it. Somebody keeps on coming on to say something more. But again, the aim of that, we think, is to show that the work of political reform is not done when a play ends, that there's another stage of the types of reforms that he's talking about, which is to actually get them into legislation. And that is a long process. So the playfulness of time is not just done for aesthetic reasons. And I think, again, that's what distinguishes us a bit from Lehman and the post-dramatic, is that for Lehman, arguably, this is primarily an aesthetic revolution. But for us, we're trying to explain in the book about why these modes of communication are used, and what they do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a choice in the postmodern world to be political. You have to make drama political and make it mean something, whereas in the previous pre-theatrical period, again, it was theatrical and political, just by dint of taking place in the places it took. In an aristocratic household, putting points before a noble audience was a political act, particularly if you're an actor. That's your only chance to speak. If you're a playwright, you're probably not the sort of person who gets asked, well, shall we raise taxes again this month, or shall we invade France? But you get a chance in a play to make all the arguments you want to make about, and particularly in a period of religious turmoil, everyone's got a point to make, and a play allows you to debate that in a way that you wouldn't normally be able to do. It's the license of that playfulness that allows it to be serious. And I think also, you made that point about an interlude. A drama takes place amidst a lot of other stuff, maybe over a couple of days. And that too, gives it that edge that you're not sure when it's done. There's a great entertainment before Henry VIII called Love and Riches, in which two people come on and debate whether love and riches or riches is better for a king to have. And then they say, oh, well, let's have a joust about it. And then there's some jousting. And then they couldn't decide it by jousting or argument. So they just go up to the king and say, well, what do you think, mate? And Henry VIII then can make a choice and comment, but also has to has to say something about whether love or riches are the most important thing to him. So it kind of blurs imperceptibly into a real moment from a variety of kind of performative modes. So of course you don't know when it's finished, because they could just bring on a jouster, or a singer, or a tumbler, or someone who farts in a comic way. And then you would just carry on, and then maybe some more food.
Yes, it's that variety of materials and that sort of sleight of hand of going from one to the other, even within a text. I mean, it's basically the game that Heywood gives himself in the 4 Ps. It's a series of things, and they are all connected, but it is a sort of plate spinning exercise of entertainment, debate, storytelling, random hopping, because... well, I think it's time to do some hopping. Shall we sing a song? Let's sing a song. And it works. And, he manages to hold it all together.
And you can see why a modern theatrical vocabulary just doesn't work for what we're describing. Did we mention ludic or ludus yet? I mean,
we
that
haven't,
kind of... No, I mean, that we don't actually talk about it in the book, I don't think, do we?
No.
No.
But it's got the same root as play. We're talking about the same idea of play.
Play, but also game and sport and recreation. And recreation has a much more profound sense in the early modern period. It's not just about an exercise or a habit or a hobby. It's like how you recreate the world around you, both individually and collectively. So the language that we have to describe what's going on is insufficient, and if we use it, we miss stuff. If we focus on actors and audiences, then lots of stuff is falling through the cracks, which is all part of the performance event that we're talking about.
I think I'm just going to bring it to modern practice as well, because this is, as we Beyond have been, performing some of these texts in slightly different contexts, of actually how forcefully these texts resist a theatre.
Yeah.
And actually, possibly the reason why a lot of these plays don't get performed is actually people have tried to do them in theatres and it doesn't work. We did a season of 6 Henrician plays. The ones which were most directly presentational, telling a story, narrative, beginning in an end, sort of worked fairly well. Anything that had that playful connection with the audience or needed to travel, which is where I'm slowly edging us towards our next point, just felt too confined, too distanced, and just didn't really work. And that was a very interesting experiment. And very recently we did a completely adapted show based on Thomas Nash's Piers Penniless, but we did it in a great hall in a college with an audience surrounding us. And suddenly a text that isn't actually doing what pre-dramatic theatre does suddenly was doing what pre-dramatic theatre did and was remarkably similar, actually. And I came to the end of it going, oh, I've created out of a 1590 text a 1520 text. Because actually, Piers Penniless by Thomas Nash has no plot. It just meanders all over the place. And it's just people in a room, as we were doing it, just trying to argue points with an audience. And it sort of really weirdly connected me closer to that moment than attempting to do the Interlude of Youth in a conventional theatre setting. So the confines of a theatre, traditional theatre, just making it harder to move around.
Yeah.
And these are texts that are very much about movement in interesting ways and different ways. Who would like to talk about processing?
Yeah, kind of my question, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think I actually wrote to you, Rob, in the process of writing this book. I was like, what do you think's going on with all these horses in these journeying places? Are there actual horses? Are they? Because that's a whole different level of event as well, isn't it? When you involve animals, never work with animals and children, but they're constantly working with animals, and that in itself does really interesting things about whether this is real or whether it's an illusion, because animals can't be unreal. Yeah, anyway, so I'm still working through all that stuff. These are plays about movement, and I think in a way that's exactly what I mean in that the way that we've approached them with modern assumptions has often masked that. So if you start to look closely at some of the mystery plays, you think, well, where have these people come from? Where are they going? This can't really be on a pageant wagon, can it? Or if it is, are they just circling? Because they're talking about a journey. We don't really think again about how these plays begin and end. And I think movement is key to how people enter and exit. And again, once you've removed the building with its entrances and exits, then you have to start to worry about that stuff a lot more and think about the staged action and what actually happens and what is just said or metonymically done on the stage. When they're talking about going for a walk, which they do a lot, there's a lot of journeying. How far are they walking? How do they move from one place to another? What kind of jump cuts of time and motion are in play when you're trying to stage that? It just raises more interesting questions when you think about drama through the lens of movement, particularly.
Because we were talking horses in the Conversion of St. Paul, which feels like, in modern parlance, we call it a promenade work, because it feels like it's going from different stations and the audience has to follow it. That feels like what it's doing. Slightly different from, say, the Passion Play in End Town, where you clearly have different locuses where they travel to different areas. But that travelling is important. The travelling makes sense of the story that they are telling in that particular moment.
And then we argue that the audience are travelling because they are travelling between stations or they're travelling through the streets. So again, this is a point of elision between what's happening on stage, if we can even call it that, or what's happening off stage. Everybody's engaged in the same kind of activity. It isn't that there's some people moving on stage and some people passively sitting in an auditorium. And then that again has effects on the message and on what's being communicated.
I used to do a production of a one-person version of Everyman. And when I first started doing it, because it was using the audience to stand up and be the various people Everyman talks to. And when I first started it, it was a one-sided performance space on the same level. And when I first started rehearsing that, I thought, well, I'll move over here, I'll move over here, I'll move over here. By the time it actually came up, it became a show, I started one end of the stage and I ended at the other end of the stage. And the whole thing just moves in a straight line from one end to the other. And what I was really powerfully connected with when you in your book was this idea of the Christian narrative. The good path is a straight path and a difficult path, but the idea that the vices sort of dance around and move around you as a sort of really dynamic way of thinking about how you stage these things and demonstrate what's going on here. And I hadn't quite fully connected in my brain, so that really interested me.
I think it's fascinating that you discovered through the process of doing that that's a linear play, that's what makes sense of it. And then if you do, we make a comparison between that and its source play, which I'm not even going to attempt to say in Dutch, where we know from the dramaturgical changes that the playwright makes that something different is going on in terms of the movement, and that it's most likely that the Dutch version is on a fixed stage with a space where things can be pushed out, but that Everyman makes a lot more sense if it happens linearly in the mode of perhaps Croxton, Play of the Sacrament as well, because its entire theme is that life is a pilgrimage. So why would you not actually stage the pilgrimage and have the audience be a part of that pilgrimage? so that they can embody the message as well as be told it.
And of course, moving is so fundamental to so many different conceptions of religious faith that, it becomes more than, if you're stuck with an audience that just has to sit, you can't do those things. So, the idea of following the stations of the cross literally, or going on a pilgrimage, or walking with Christ. I mean, these all they're things that are metaphors, but they actually are rooted in the body. And so that really kind of corporeal faith that late medieval Catholicism, early modern Catholicism has at its heart, why would it not, like Eleanor says, why would it not be part of what a playwright who was part of that same culture and an acting company that was from that culture would want its audience to do? They're not telling you things that you need to know. You probably know that Jesus was quite a good bloke and died rather painfully in ways that was significant for you. So you use the production to actually make that true, to make it feel. It's not content delivery, it's experience that performance is all about. And I think that's what's behind a lot of what we say in the book.
Yeah, and also thought was just leaping at me is that if your show has a direction, I'm going back to playfulness again, is that so long as you get in that direction, what the actors are doing is not fixed. It's not about blocking. It's not about absolutes. You know by the end you need to be over there. That is your goal. And that there are obstacles or things happening in between. But that then also contains the negotiation with the audience, the negotiation with the text, the negotiation between performers. And again, it retains a level of playfulness that a constrained space that you end up with quite fixed rules about how it works sort of resists.
I think a really good example of that would be, I'm probably too old. I mean, the Bill Bryden Passion, the Mysteries that was put on on the South Bank and then came into town in the 70s and then around the millennium. They're trying to recreate the experience of watching a Passion play in a fixed space. And you can kind of see the actors' training seeping into the production. And, it's promenade, it's supposedly chaotic, but they're still trying to control. And there's a great moment when John Tams, who was responsible for the music and was also acting, you could see him looking at the audience and thinking, they're where we need to be. So he sort of says, well, we're going to do a dance just about there, and kind of points. And then the audience obediently kind of steps back to allow them to come in and do the dance. Whereas I don't think an early modern company, a pre-theatrical company, would have worried about that. They'd just come in and say, get out of the way, we're doing a dance now. And if they didn't move, they'd do the dance somewhere else, or they wouldn't do the dance. It's that notion of, as long as we end up over there at the end, it's worked. It doesn't have to be a well-made play. And that's so integral to notions of theatre, both in terms of, is it a tragedy? Is it a comedy? Can we detect its shape? But also something that doesn't get kind of wobbly in the middle. And that kind of wibbly-wobbliness, it's fine for pre-theatrical drama.
Well, and while we're on wibbly-wobbliness, we're sort of onto time as well. What is going on with notions of time within these plays, which is sort of where you sort of reach a relative conclusion in your book. That time is always moving forward, but there are sort of cyclical elements. Things are sort of happening at the same time, especially with mystery dramas, where while you're performing in one place, someone else is performing a later event up the street and an earlier event down the street, and what's going on with time in this playful universe of movement?
I suppose, it's I'll give Eleanor time to say something cleverer, but I'll busk for a minute. I'll fill up some time.
Very pre-dramatic, yeah.
It's multiple, isn't it? It's both absolutely a non-negotiable. Time goes forward. What I said 2 seconds ago, I can't go back and change. I've not the first idea what I'm going to say, spoiler, in the next 2 minutes. But at that same time, you can bring in all kinds of different notions. So, you've got, in terms of the York cycle, say, you have the kind of eschatological narrative that's always ending in the Last Judgment and the end of the world, and was always going to do so from the very moment that time was created at the beginning. And that's mapped onto the city of York through the pageant wagons moving round and the play moving forward. But then you can just mess about with it. And it's obvious that we're not really in first century Palestine. We're not really beyond the confines of time and space at any point. But we can all agree that we might be, and talk as if we were in that classic formalization. So it allows you to be so playful. One moment it just takes a gesture or a look to say, well, we all know we're not there, we're here. And then you're back there again, and then there is somewhere else.
And there's also the repetition, the annual repetition, and how that inflects the meaning. If you've been seeing these plays since you were a child, all the way through your life course potentially, and those streets take on a different meaning each year of your life that passes. Something's happened to you there, you saw a criminal being punished there, it really upset you or excited you, or every experience is going to be the same and also different, and it's going to help you realize where you are in your life.
And it's not separate from the real world, because the same thing is happening in liturgy in the church. The priest dresses differently every Easter when Christ dies again and rises again, and then at Christmas he's born again every year, but it's only once. And then in the Mass every day he is again created. So it's that notion that time is always kind of folded in on itself in productive ways, and you can look at it differently depending on what aspect of your life you're engaging with at that moment.
And they're not, all of these, the texts we're sort of talking about, are not about what later drama will be doing, which is, the surprise. It's not interested in surprise because it's about repetition. It's like so many interlude dramas basically are the same, in terms of basic structure. You kind of know what they're going to get at. There might be a variation, but they are all very, very similar texts. And the point is not to be surprised per se. Yeah. It's to recognise the variations and the similarities from a previous encounter.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's much more noticeable with mystery plays, but it's quite apparent with other interlude drama as well that actually surprise is not, and dramatic narrative drive is not actually the aim.
And that's why people have often misunderstood this sort of drama as static. I think they see allegorical drama as sort of boring and repetitive and static, but that's kind of it's not static, as I think we've shown. These are very active plays, but in terms of movement, but also that's kind of the point of them is the restatement and the repetition and the re-experiencing of something. It's the direct opposite to what's going to happen in the playhouse, where it's all about newness. It's all about, they're just playing these plays for one night, potentially at a time, and perhaps never again. Like it's a completely different form in that sense, or commercial form, certainly. That's, I think, so there's a theatre historiography issue here as well, where things get mushed together. In terms of, I use premodern in my work a lot, but we are trying to differentiate something that's quite distinct that's happening in the medieval and late medieval period and into the early 16th century from what happens with the building, the architecture, and the expectations, as we said at the beginning, of how you design drama for those spaces.
And that desire for novelty, I think, we look in the wrong place if you're expecting to find novelty and content in something like an interlude or the religious plays. I don't think anybody watches the Crucifixion and the Passion play and is surprised that the guy with the crown of thorns gets crucified. That's not where the surprise is. The surprise comes in that moment of, oh, that's me he's talking to, or, oh, yeah, now I see what that means. Because you've watched someone be crucified and then they forgive the people that crucify them and they turn to you and say, this is what I've done for you. What do you feel? And that moment you are really exposed to something new, but it's not the content. It's the way the performance engages with you. And I think that's very like Lehmann's notion of the post-dramatic, in that you're stripped of any comfort that comes with being in a theatre, and you're just confronted with someone who says, well, what are you going to do about this? This happening, this extraordinary act of sort of self-abnegation or whatever that is that the performer is doing. You're just confronted with it, and you have to say, well, what do I do with this? And that's kind of taking drama really back to its kind of root and saying, I'm going to pretend something and I want you to respond to it. And then you just have to do it. And if it's something like death or pain or the saving of the soul or damnation, that response is going to live with you probably forever. And those accounts we've got from the 16th century, I mean, there's a wonderful one about a boy who saw a play with his dad in Stratford, I think it was. And, he still remembered it when he was 65. And what he remembered was the noise and the kind of violent explosion of sensation he felt. What he's saying is, wow, theatre, but not the going to the theatre. It's the performance of that moment.
It's always interesting what survives as well, isn't it? Like I'm thinking about an account of watching the late Lancashire Witches, and one of the things that survives in that spectator's mind is when kittens come out of a pie, and that's not in the text. So this is something that was completely due to the performance. Not only does it point up how much we've lost, but also we can talk about these plays till the cows come home, and what that guy remembers is kittens tumbling out of a pie, because you would.
Well, who wouldn't?
Yeah, and we get this with civic pageantry as well. I mean, I think it's the 1585 Lord Mayor's show. We have an eyewitness, and basically it's like he talks about what food was available. He talks about how busy and crowded it was. He says there were some very pretty girls, and basically doesn't mention the actual show almost at all. And because actually that's not the most interesting thing. It's the event is perhaps more interesting, and an occasional visual, and just that thrill of anything could happen.
And if I was going to criticize our book, if I was going to review our book,
until they bought it, come on.
Or I might suggest that those are pre-dramatic elements that continue into the more, the beginning of the dramatic period, and that would be a useful way of thinking about what's going on. And
I'm always interested in actually finding echoes of interlude drama in so many other forms, and I think that would be an excellent future conversation. But alas, we have run out of time. Where can people find your book? We didn't assign who was going to do the plug, but who would like to do the plug?
They can find it on the Palgrave Macmillan website, and it's available in ebook form and in other material forms. I think it's $34.99
at time of recording. Yes,
modestly priced. Yeah,
an absolute bargain. So that's where you can find it, or you can buy individual chapters.
Yes, links are in the show description, so you'll be able to find it there. Yes, all that remains is to thank my wonderful guests for being wonderful. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, Rob. Goodbye.
Thank you.